don't need no sneakers like that. So Sally, should we come to finance too?
No. Was that quick enough? All right, order. You can't start without the mayor. I mean, we're.
Transportation Committee meeting with a roll call. I'm Ellie Tierney, Alderwoman Award 1 Chair. To my right is
Alderwoman Pendell Charles here.
and we're waiting, Mark, but we're going to continue. The third item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Do I have any changes to the agenda? Okay, can I have a motion to approve?
I move that the agenda be approved.
I second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of our meeting held last couple weeks ago. I don't know the date of it here, but let me just double check that. It was held February 21st. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting on the 21st?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, aye. And our first item on the agenda is legislative, which is ordinance 047-18, special events. Hi, Shanika, I know you're watching. For the purpose of amending the definition of city-sponsored event. I'm also a co-sponsor on this, so I guess I could introduce it as being something that came up after the little bit of confusion after the concert that we had, and what is a city-sponsored event, and what is the criteria. So, this is amending an existing piece of legislation, and we specifically, on page 2 of 047-18, we specifically define a city-sponsored event means a special event that the City Council approves by resolution as a city-sponsored event. We know what that is. Inures solely, I had to look up that word, inures solely to the benefit of the public with no profit or emolument to the city to thereby serve a governmental function, and 3, benefits the public health, safety, and welfare to thereby serve a governmental purpose. Well, we have an amendment later on. We'll discuss where we revise the order of that criteria. Discussion? Oh, here he is. Actually, no problem. Actually, I don't see the recommendation. Where didn't?
It's not in there yet.
Oh, it's not in there yet? Oh, okay, so we won't talk about that.
Changed the order, so we became
Yeah, we changed the order. We're on special events, our first piece of legislation that we're looking at, the definition of special events. Do you have anything to discuss?
No, I've seen that one from
Yeah.
Alderman Henson, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you wave to her? I'm waving. Hi, Shanika. So, yeah, that's, so no questions, no discussion. So is there a motion to recommend 047-18 by the Transportation Committee?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And that's when I'll ask why does transportation look at that? No. The next one is, the next piece of legislation is 03-19, sidewalk, snow, and ice removal of fine for the purpose of making technical corrections to the code of the City of Annapolis concerning the fine for a failure to remove snow and ice from a sidewalk. I'm the sponsor of this one, and this came up during one of our snowstorms this past winter. And the thought was that the fee was only $25 or such. And then Teresa did her due diligence and saw that the fee, the council a couple years ago passed a fee resolution increasing the fee, and the code was not corrected to match it. So this is what this piece of legislation does. And now you're going to ask me what that fee is, and I think it's $100, if I'm not mistaken. Should be in the staff report here. Yes. If you don't clear the sidewalk adjacent to your property in a timely, fashion, blah, 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 it's a fine of $100. Yeah, so that's what it's basically a code correction to match the fee. Is there any discussion?
Did you accidentally summon me?
Oh, hi. Hi there, Siri.
So we're changing it from
See,
25.
so now we can always have a quorum, but.
So
Well,
it's gonna be
it was,
100, right?
yeah, it was changed a couple years ago, and then I talked about it with Ward 1, because there was some, there were some serious concerns about what if you're elderly and that kind of thing. That's a pretty hefty fine. So the thought with the Ward 1 Residents Association was create their own network of snow shovelers, and then there is this program where the mids come out when it is, I don't know if they just go downtown, but the mids come out and they shovel sidewalks and all that. But I guess it is a prevalent problem on people that might not live in their homes, and they might have an apartment and they don't shovel. So yeah, but again, if this is amended, then we would have to go back and amend the fee that was increased a couple years ago. So I think a lot of discussion was made when they increased the fee from 25 to 100. I don't know if my colleagues remember that at all. Do you remember increasing the snow removal from 25 to 100 in the fee schedule?
I remember.
Sorry to put you on the spot,
I remember,
Ross.
but I don't remember a lot of
You just,
discussion.
yeah.
Mainly because there's no enforcement anyway, so make it
Yeah.
1,000.
Okay, well, we'll
Neighbors
settle for
battling on
100.
Yeah, right. You get the split of finder fee, half for you, half for the city.
New business.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You would have to,
Is there some sort of
let's see if there's.
discretionary waiving by the city in the event that it is, for example, someone who just really couldn't,
I don't know if they can
like
codify,
elderly or I don't know.
if
whatever.
they could, can we codify that, or is that a human right? I mean, to address a specific handicap or something? I don't know.
Well,
if
I'm
that's-
thinking like,
Because I kind
when
of
the
agree with
water,
you.
with the water bills,
I mean, if the toilet continues to overflow.
yeah, it's not, it's something out of your control. There was like a one time, like the finance director could waive it. Like that kind of situation would seem reasonable to me.
Just see what it says here. Within, wow, it's really, we did delete the violation of this section should be a municipal infraction and is subject to a fine. It doesn't, just calls them out as a person in 3 hours. Would you like recommend any sort of amendment to address a situation where the city is?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the language would be, but some sort of possibility of some discretion to waive from whoever ultimately is supervising this and as part of the city. So whether that,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's director of public works or finance director or
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I guess related to that, if there was some way, if the city website could have a list of, no, I don't know if they can do that. You know what I mean? Like, could help. Well, so do you want to recommend that? And
Yeah, and then we work out the language.
we can work out the language?
Sure,
Okay,
so-
Okay. So let's, I make a motion that we, I can't make a motion. Do I have a motion to amend the legislation to address a different situation?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. So do I have a motion, to accept it, do I have to do as amended?
Recommended.
Yeah, recommended as amended, ordinance 03-19 as amended.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so we'll await that
Okay.
language. Alrighty, this is another technical one. Boy, I feel like I'm busy here. This is, actually, this was generated by, this legislation, 07-19, was generated from constituent services getting a complaint that they didn't know, they knew a contractor was coming to do work, but they were confused by the way the legislation, the requirement to notify 96 hours in advance, which I don't blame them. That's kind of like you have to start, using your fingers, like what's 96 hours? And so we simply revised it to 3 business days, and there was discussion about making it less, because sometimes you don't know if a plumber's going to show up for a day or two and that kind of thing. But then in surveying the residents, these construction signs are kind of a pain because you lose a parking space. It basically, so the residents kind of want to know in advance. So the mutual understanding was to keep it relatively close to the 96 hours, which was 3 days. Am I correct, Rick? The change from 96 to 3 days was really a convenience for the constituents yeah. So that was pretty much the gist of that one. So do I have a motion to, well, any discussion? Sorry. I just feel like I'm doing all the discussing. Okay, we're good? All right, do I have a motion to recommend 07-19, special parking permit for transport shuttles and contractors?
So moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All righty. I thought we wouldn't get through all those. Look what's here. No, I shouldn't. This is R45-18, 2018 Forest Drive Eastport Sector Study for the purpose of adopting the Forest Drive Eastport Sector Study as an amendment to the 2009 Annapolis Comprehensive Plan. My understanding is that there was, at the Rules and City Government, there was suggested that this, move forward through committee, and each committee were responsible for their respective titles, I guess. And I sort of figured that because as Transportation Committee, we look at Title 12, 14, and 22, parking, public transportation, and vehicular traffic. So any of our comments would be in that framework of parking, public transportation, and vehicular traffic. And I just want to throw out a few things here, and then I guess we can have a discussion. As regarding, what? We good? There's, when we match up our requirement, it's very organized, the report itself. If you look at the traffic piece, it's pretty much, in mobility, it's kind of categorized here in pages, well, mobility 29 through 35 is sort of the guidelines. And I'm going to just throw this out that I don't think that we can possibly, as a committee, recommend adopting is a strong word. And what I would ask my colleagues is if we can at least agree on a framework or agree on the initiatives of this report as they relate to transportation. Do we agree in the philosophy, and then recommend that to, to the other committees and to the council, our support of these initiatives. I'm throwing that out there. I think adoption is something we're not ready to talk about. But I do want to just say that I'm a strong town advocate, strongtowns.org, and I know that there are these national initiatives, and I commend planning and zoning for incorporating them in this report. And I think one of the most telling things is what this report tells me is how sad it is that we got to this point. But it's sort of human behavior. Everybody wants to live, in a dead-end cul-de-sac with a hierarchical, is that a word? Road network, and that doesn't scale very well. And even at a small scale, it's a fiscal loser basically. And that's why we have such a problem in the Forest Drive area, because contemporary, development patterns have made the area auto-centric and unproductive. So something needs to be done, and it's you got to stop the madness. And I think that's what I got out of this was a billboard to me to say, we can't make Forest Drive any bigger unless you want it to be a highway. And we don't want to make it any bigger. We want to change the mentality of how we get around. And that's hard to, it's a paradigm shift. And so I think, where we've been deficient is in some of the subdivision regulations, which I know planning and zoning has made some attempts to correct and all of that. And I think we have no choice but to look at this multimodal approach. The county is taking a similar tact. They've actually, drafted legislation on multimodal development, and it's not a slam dunk, but I think it's a way that it's the only way that we can live with what we have and I guess optimize what we have is the better word. So when you look at the transportation component of this report and the objectives, I mean, I can read them and say, what do we disagree with? And I don't, let's see. So if you look at page, on mobility, vehicular, and transit, it's solutions, and it's like 43. And this is under mobility, vehicular, and transit, and it's all under the complete street standards, and I call them 20-minute villages, and that, again, that is a national initiative, is to have these 20-minute villages so that you have these enclaves where you live and possibly work, but you definitely can shop and get your groceries, and that's what this is. What this study is trying to say. Sally, do you want to come up and just brief us on the transportation part? Because I don't want to put words in your mouth, and maybe I'm just too excited about smart growth, but and explain the explain what multimodal transportation is and all that.
Good evening, Sally Nash, Department of Planning and Zoning. Do you want to go through the sheets that were posted for Transportation Committee? Yes, from the appendix, where we have more details about the proposed solutions or strategies and the actions and the time frame. It is in Appendix E. It's E4 if you have the whole document, but I have pulled out these pages for this meeting as well.
My colleagues, as Sally explains all this, is to just think about what would be your objection, you know, to these. Go ahead.
All right, so transportation has purview over two of the areas. They're both called mobility. One, we focus more on vehicular and transit, and one, we focus more on bicycle and pedestrian. So in the first section, the goal of this section was to formalize interjurisdictional cooperation with the mission of having shared design guidelines, complete streets development, public transit improvements, and investments in new technology that help improve road capacity. So this goal is a recognition that we have to work with the county, the state, and other partners to achieve our vehicular and transit mobility goals. The strategies are listed on the left, and we separated the ones we felt were the most essential, and those are called the principal solutions. So those include revising the city's traffic study guidelines, the way we do traffic studies, and also establishing complete street standards for the city.
I think you need to explain what complete streets are.
Complete streets means taking into account all modes of travel in one street. So not just cars, but bikes, pedestrians. So making sure the street is designed to allow all of those users as well as transit.
Thank you.
So in order to implement those strategies, we would like to amend our transportation APF and our guidelines, similar to in what the county has done with their multimodal traffic guidelines that they've recently.
Oh, they did?
They did actually recently adopt.
Oh, yay, okay.
As well as other changes that would help us focus on a multimodal approach to traffic and not just focusing on our traditional autocentric ways of measuring traffic. So this could ensure that we're measuring what we value and we get from development what we value. So we don't just get a good way for cars to get from point A to point B, but the development itself also helps us achieve our mobility goals.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that would be something we would want to do in the near term.
Mm-hmm.
The additional solutions are similar and build on those ideas, but they're basically planning for transit-oriented infill, the kind of development that would encourage transit use, working with the county and the state, especially on the Fairfax Road, Chinkopin Round Road, Bywater Road segment, which is the biggest bottleneck of the Forest Drive corridor.
So when you talk about infill, that would be development, right? what does that mean? Low-scale transit-oriented infill along the corridor and at the
Infill
two,
development, yes.
and at the two opportunity sites to better support, so the cluster development so that you don't have to drive so far. But when you
That's right.
talk about development, it's, you still have and correct me if I'm wrong, but you have the baseline scenario amidst, what are the three categories? High, low, and medium, medium, low, medium, and high, right?
Right.
Is that, okay.
So
So it's still
before-
like a multiple choice. Yeah.
Well, so before we started really anything, the Planning Commission said, we want some more in-depth traffic analysis, and we want to know what the worst-case scenario looks like.
Mhm.
So we worked with Baltimore Metropolitan Council and have used their transportation model to develop different scenarios. And the main difference between our scenarios is how much development occurs in the next 15 years and how quickly it occurs. So the high scenario is, there's more development that is occurring faster. The mid scenario is, more development than we would really expect, the baseline is pretty much the kind of development we've seen in the past and we expect to see in the future, which is about 50 dwelling units a year, more or less.
Mhm. How did you integrate the travel? I mean, I know you did a survey and the travel mode choices. I mean, this was based on what travel mode choices was it based on?
Well, so we did do the survey. The first survey we did was our best performer. It got over 1,000 respondents. And what we heard overwhelmingly really relates to the next section, which is the bike and ped facilities. People want more options, more choices for bicycling and pedestrian. But people also recognize the need for better transit operations, more convenient and more frequent transit operations. So
And then-
most of that data
yeah.
was from either the survey or the open houses that we had where we got feedback from people.
And just as an aside, and I'll shut up, but from reading this, for example, when you start talking about the cluster developments and infill, that was based on surveys where you asked people what they wanted within a walking distance, and 20% of them said they wanted a grocery store, and 15% said they wanted a bus stop, that kind of stuff. So you weighed that into what we're looking at right now, basically.
Right.
Yeah. So they weren't just assumptions; they were based on a survey of the residents or a little bit of both. Pete?
The recommendations in the plan were based on what we heard that people wanted.
Yeah.
They're also based on existing conditions. We have a lot of those pieces already there that there just needs to be a little bit better.
Okay.
And just make the connections a little bit better between the grocery store and the neighborhood.
Yeah. I'm sorry to keep interrupting. You want to continue on the solutions?
Yeah, I bet Ross $5 that I was going to finish. Well, I don't know if you really want me to go through every one of these, but basically the idea is we heard issues from the public about things they were worried about. We proposed some strategies, ran these by the public, asked them to propose solutions or strategies to the issues. And then we thought, what would we really need to do to implement them, which is where the action items came in. A lot of them have to do with either changing laws like APF, updating how we do our CIPs process. And there are other actual infrastructure projects that would need to go into the CIP. But there are other ideas that we haven't done and we would have to figure out exactly how to do, but this was a really popular idea, the Road Improvement Escrow Fund. So it would be creating a fund that developers could pay into, and then we could pool the money to get some big project done in the future. So a lot of times the impact the developer has is very small, and it's, you know, it's not going to help us to really address this small impact. But if we could get money from developers and use that money in a bigger project, that would be more impactful.
So it's a good, I see it as what I'm used to calling a responsibility matrix. In other words, you have solutions, you say who's responsible, and then you have the time of implementation.
Right.
But they're not all absolute. I mean, they're not standalone solutions like on these, you know, different intersections and stuff. It depends.
Right, there's a lot of overlap, and almost all of them would depend on us having partnerships with other agencies and entities.
So it gets to the definition of what we're approving, which is really a framework.
Right, not one of these things would have to be done if you adopted this plan. It's just, this is something that has support. You know, this is an idea that has support. This is something if there's political will, we can implement this.
Yeah, because that's what you're asking for is political will. I guess that's the word. But because look, you have to talk to the county on, you know, the bus routes and the intermodal transit and what they're doing on the county corridor. There's a lot of variables.
Right.
Yeah, but you're identifying them, which is a lot of work. Did you want to say something, Mr. Gutwald?
I was just going to add that it's being able to put the tools in the tool shed, so you have them available for when the opportunity strikes, you use them. And that's sort of that's what we're trying to build on here. So I mean, you were using the framework idea or the policies, but a lot of this is getting the tools in place that they may or may not be used tomorrow, but if they're in place, we have the opportunity to use these tools when the opportunity strikes. So.
Yes, sir. Yes. Oh, Mark. Yes.
Thank you so much, and seriously, thank you for all the work that was put into this over, what was it, a year now or more? 2. Well, yeah, since I was an intern at Chair. I'm sitting on those meetings.
Your predecessor started this meeting.
So incredible, thank you. And I guess since we're in transportation committee and just kind of want to focus more on the traffic element a little bit, because as you went out, well, we share some friends in common that's their main concern feedback. And so I find pretty fascinating what you're saying about the new multimodal approach and complete streets. That I would love to learn a little bit more about that approach, because just from a little bit I read about it, seems like it's like best practice, more modern approach. Am I right?
It's the state of the art. It's the best practices is what we're talking about.
Yeah. And so what do you say to some of the people who may not agree with that, saying that it takes away the objective standards for developers and kind of leaves it more discretionary and if it can't, and then how does that, you know, change the APF if the failing traffic service can't be remedied in that area? And like you said, I love the idea of the escrow fund, but I guess then tied to that are some concerns around how to use that, or how that money would be used, or for what types of projects. So if you could just kind of, for my benefit, walk through those concerns and exactly how you see that kind of changing. I don't know if I was clear.
Right. So that is what makes the escrow fund complicated, is that a developer has an impact. The developer must mitigate that impact. If the developer is giving us money and we use that money to pay for a bike lane on the other side of town, you know, there's not a connection there between the developer's impact and the mitigation that we've used the money for. So that is something that requires a lot of thought in terms of how do we make sure that the improvement we are going to do with the money actually mitigates the impact that that development has in some way. You know, so
Yeah, I mean, there's always the nexus between what their impact is and what they're doing, but the idea, I guess, with the escrow and the money or the traffic, you know, like this, the county has traffic impact fees or transportation impact fees. So what you do is you develop sort of traffic sheds and say, okay, your traffic, you know, moves in and around this area, and your greatest impact is within. So anything that develops in here, you set your impact fee based on that, based on the required improvements or the understanding of improvements that are necessary in this given area, and therefore your impact fee is X, Y, Z. You probably do one for the whole city, and then you would depend upon where that money got spent is where you've collected the money. Just like school impact fees, anything else. This is where your impact is on these, in this feeder system, this is where the money gets spent. The question I was grappling with was you were talking about the discretionary. I mean, how do you determine, based on a different way of doing traffic analysis and determining what the improvements are? There would have to be we need to take a longer look at that, but there are methodologies that say, and I think Alderwoman Tierney was getting at, the travel forecast demand the travel demand forecasting model sort of sits there and has assumptions. If the land use scenario is this, and these amenities are within this area, and the traffic congestion is Y, it's just going to start peeling off cars and say, you provide this improvement or this transit, this opportunity for bus transit. It's going to say you will take this many trips off the road based on that. So then you start looking at, okay, your impact is X. Here's the remedy for Y, and here's how we justified you pay. You know, this is the amenity you're going to provide because you're going to remove X number of trips off the road, or based on your trip generation, you've mitigated the number of trips you're adding to the road, if you will. So that's sort of how I'm doing this at this level now. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of math involved in all that. So
you have to have a performance measure, and you have to have a performance target, and you have to have a way of monitoring the progress with your target.
Yeah, I mean, that makes more sense. And as we're supporting and wanting more, like, different approaches to not just focus on car-centric.
Right, that's the idea. Move away from that. If the Planning Commission, a lot of wanted to move away from level of service analysis. They don't want to talk about that because we kind of get hung up on what's a level of service and what does that mean.
Yeah.
And something that's a level of service D is not acceptable to some people. I mean, there are jurisdictions who have acceptable level of services of F because they're trying to promote the transit alternatives rather than the audio-centric. So they will accept more development in the anticipation that they'll provide additional transit opportunities, kind of thing. Yeah. So, and likewise, there's jurisdictions that, they level of service C is what they want because that's the expectation of the tolerance of the community. So, and they were saying, let's get away from that and let's talk about, how we can improve the flow of traffic and how we get different multimodal approaches involved. So,
yeah, and so thank you for that. Just one question. Another question right now is, this obviously concerns Ward 5 significantly in the sense of, I'm talking about the city, county, state collaboration. Given, for example, Spa Road, Forest being a state road, Forest being county, and then feeder streets being city, and so forth. And I know there's definitely a blueprint for collaboration, and they have been involved in this project, which is critical. I guess is there a method? I'm just thinking of an analogy, for example, when I get calls from constituents to fix potholes on Old Forest Drive. It took me until then to learn that it was it was owned by the state, right behind the Brewsters and all of that. And so the coordination to try and get the state to prioritize fixing those, and they did because of the good relationship that Mr. Gerald has with the State Highway
District
Authority.
But
But it almost seemed like a more informal kind of process. And so I'm wondering, with the CIP phasing proposal or action item, which seems great, which seems really smart, how does that intersect or interact with the programming of the county and the state? Is there methodology kind of for that, or is there some sort of formality around that process? Because I know that's another concern for some people.
There's
CTP.
right, there is the state plan that the county writes a priority letter every year to the state saying what its priorities are. And they send the letter to us and say, what are your priorities? We send them our priorities, and they put them into their letter. They're usually like number 7 or 8, but they're in the letter.
Okay.
And everything has to be in this priority letter for it to be eligible for funding from the state. So it's not exactly a formal process, but it's a little bit,
Well, it is a formal, not to interrupt, but it is right. It's a formal process by the state. So we've been improving on that over the years. I have to say, I don't think there was much going on, I would say before me. Only because I don't know what's going on before me. But understanding that process, that we got ourselves interjected with the county because we're part of the county.
Yeah.
So now we've informally created that relationship. So now they are coordinating with us when they're talking to the state about state needs and everything like that. But yeah, we probably need to do more formal, coordination with the county and the city as we go forward. And informally, it's been regular. We've been, for just sharing data and sharing traffic information, those kinds of things have been working. We need to formalize it a little more better with like public safety and those kinds of things. And I think that has begun too under the last administration. I think with the public safety, Chief Baker and Chief Simmons has been working with the county on incident management things and situations and those kinds of things. So it's sort of been there. We just need to extend it into the planning and traffic engineering parts.
So maybe, yeah, that makes sense. So maybe coming up with some sort of memorandum between the city and county that formalizes the working relationship, before you do this, you have to check with us so that we, you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good idea because we were pretty well coordinated with the county as far as their Department of Public Works goes, as far as their long-range planning goes, and as far as their Office of Transit goes. But I think we do have a bit of disconnect with their development review division, where there doesn't seem to be a very formal way of us having any input over to what they're doing near the city limits.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
So that's probably one area where we can work on. But I know I've been going to, the county organizes these state highway quarterly meetings. I've been going to a lot more meetings where it's county, state, and city's been brought in a lot more recently than ever before.
Yeah, that's great. And I mentioned because I spent over the holidays a little bit of time in Bend, Oregon. And so they have a similar situation to us where they have their own city, Bend council, and then they're within Deschutes County, and their own county council and so forth. And where I was staying, one of the neighbors there happened to be an assistant city attorney for Bend. And so we just started talking, shop, right? And we talked about this a little bit, and she showed me, or sent me later on, this agreement between the city and county for all kind of development related purposes. It was incredible. So maybe we can start thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
Alderman Arnett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I see that Sally's trying to win the $5 by jumping all the way down to 3.3.10, but I see Mr. Gordon in the back of the room, and he should join in on this fund in 3.3.7 and 8, because these are talking about improvements in the bus service and span of service and some technical things I'm not sure I understand. But I guess my basic question would be how much more we think we can wring out of the bus service that we have. It says improve the bus service in the corridor, strive for more frequent, inexpensive, and efficient service. I think you're already striving for that, but And maybe there's more to come. And then improve city services by routing the span of service info on bus stops and improving the board accessibility. I think you have looked at that. That's like, I guess, automating all of our bus stops, and that might not be.
That would be nice, but
Yeah.
don't expect it anytime soon.
Well, that's part of the problem with all of this is.
We are trying what we can to make public transit operation as efficient as possible. One of the biggest hurdles that we have to overcome is the headways in the service. And as you know, back in 2014, we took a major hit on our services, and we're trying to replace that now. That is probably the biggest problem we hear about from our riders is the headways. Nobody wants to wait an hour, 45 minutes for the next bus.
Yeah.
So we're trying to do something with that. In the not too distant future, I will be bringing our transit development plan down for you all's review. And we have some things in there that may interest you. I'm sure you're all familiar with microtransit. We're not quite there yet, but we have a concept similar to that we want to try and implement to address some of those communities that are underserved at this point. And we work closely with the county and state as well.
So how much of our transportation service now is focused on Forest Drive? How many lines do we have going down Forest Drive?
I'm guessing, but I want to say at least 2 or 3.
2 or 3.
Yeah.
So if we made this a much more dense corridor, will you be able to give us some estimates for the CIP on the additional equipment you're going to need to buy, and I guess for the budget, the appropriations budget, the additional drivers you're going to have?
If the demand is there, yes.
Right. Okay. So that's what makes me a little, a lot of this is dependent upon what we're going to be able to shuck up in the CIP. And it seems like it's kind of presuming that there's more efficiencies yet to come out of the system. And with the resources we have, I guess I'm not really convinced that there's that much more to bring out.
Right, but just remember that any development wouldn't occur overnight. You know, we're 10 years out from any development project being open and needing bus service, and we don't know what 10 years is going to bring us in terms of innovations in transit technology like microtransit.
What is microtransit? I don't know what it is.
It's simply transit that relies somewhat on electronics. You can request services with your mobile phone.
It's like Lyft.
Sort of like Lyft, yes.
And Uber.
Yes,
Okay.
sort of like that.
So it's already here.
Only better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to that point, when you're looking, Rick, when you're looking at transit routes, the study, let me back up. Could you explain, Sally, what a TAZ is? Do I have the right acronym? Could you, yeah, go ahead.
Right, it's just a traffic analysis. It is
Yeah.
how the Baltimore Metropolitan Council breaks down a big area into smaller areas, and it analyzes those zones based on census information. They're similar to census block groups. They're not exactly the same, but they're close. And it's how it analyzes demographic and economic data to feed its transportation model.
Yeah, because what it was interesting is, and again, how it affects, you know, this affects Ward 1 is 20, from the neck to downtown is 20-something% of the trips, you know, that they're going downtown. So in evaluating transit routes, you should be looking at this, Rick, to see where some of these could be beneficial to have as a, you know,
Well,
we might
some of
even
the
have them
data-
as a transit route already.
Right.
Yeah.
I will say some of the data for this plan came from the TDP that Rick is working on.
That's
So
music to my ears. That's just good stuff. Thank you.
So
No,
they're-
but, I mean, because I see
yeah.
this, and if you're not cross-pollinating, that's
right.
good.
It's
Yeah,
it's a good plan that you'll
Yeah.
be seeing.
It's all about cross-pollination.
It's cross-pollinating.
That's what we're all about.
Oh, that's all what we're all about here. I know, I don't want to get into, I tend to get into the weeds here, but let me just ask, you,
And your own home, please.
and then we can get on with bicycles, but let me get on with a macro question in how this, I don't know where it is, but you have ridership, maybe you know the page, you have ridership of one person in a car versus bike versus bus, and you have the comparison between 2,000 children. Mrs. Tierney is talking. You have a comparison of what people use to drive, or whatever they use, from 2,000. You know the chart I'm talking about, and it was disappointing. Where the heck is that? It was disappointing because it had more people
Driving.
using their cars as a single driver. And
Are you
then,
talking about in the C, Appendix C?
I don't think it was in Appendix C. Yeah, it was in C, because that's where all the
C10?
meat of the stuff is. Did you find
Bingo.
it?
No,
Yeah.
maybe it's not C10.
But the point of it was that
B4. Bingo.
it's this
Bingo.
this projectile, for lack of a better word, this projectile can't continue. We can't. So, as a government, how do we? What is our obligation in making that shift back down? Or how do we train people? We can have this report and it can say all these good things about different ways of transportation, but what if I'm down at the neck and I want to go to work downtown? What's going to cause me to get on that bus versus drive my car? What is it? The gas price? Is it things out of our control? That's sort of like it's a macro question, but from that I see we can continue on that trajectory, because it's gonna
Right.
be.
We're never going to be able to build our way out of it.
Yeah. Do you wanna
I
try
was just
that?
going to say, as I said at the Rules Committee, there's no silver bullet.
Yeah,
So the idea behind this plan
yeah,
was the combination of the parts make you whole.
yeah.
So there's different pieces that have to be implemented along the way in order
Yeah.
to be effective in changing the way we've been doing things.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a combination of the parts that make this work.
I'm thinking more of human behavior too. I don't know how
But
you.
you asked what's going to get people out of their cars and into transit. There's a number of things that have to make it, and
We have to-
convenience is the number one. And Rick, convenience is going to be the number one reason why they get out of their car, because we are in love with our vehicles.
yeah,
So
yeah.
you've got to make it convenient, and it's got to be the best way to get from A to B. So
Yeah.
Including efficiency, but it is competing with all of the cars. The congestion is one of the biggest problems for transit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alderman Savage?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I do have a question related to that. But again, as you've heard me say, I think I support a number of the initiatives in here, such as the shift to multimodal development and transportation, the complete streets. But I do worry, again, that the ambitiousness makes it, one, politically difficult, but also almost cannibalistic, in the sense that some of the provisions, which I can get into a bit, like Appendix D, I think potentially, at least based on my reading, potentially makes it worse in terms of worsening traffic, or form-based zoning potentially making it more dense and more impactful to traffic. But the one question I asked I was more commenting, I think, rules and government, but I do want to kind of reiterate the question about, I think one of the underlying assumptions is that the multi-use development will, again, reduce the amount of people who have to leave the city, right, and leave for jobs. And as I mentioned in there, the data seems to show that the jobs that are leaving are for, again, the medical, education, and science.
Right.
So if the new development, multi-use development, is not going to be bringing in those kind of jobs, how is that going to be helping to reduce the overall output of export of jobs that we have in the city?
Why wouldn't it be bringing in those kinds of jobs?
Well, there's nothing in that I've seen in like the community character that's going to bring in those kind of businesses or jobs. It seems to be focused on
Well, let's say
retail
medical
and-
offices. You could have more medical offices.
But
Portia.
what is there, because form-based zoning gets away from the use restrictions, so what is there to get those kind of uses in
Right,
there?
so now we have businesses, they want it, like 1750 Forest Drive, they wanted to be all medical offices, where MAFE used to be. But because of their zoning, they can only be 30% medical office. So if we had just office was one of our use categories and they wanted to be all medical office, they could have done that. I'm not saying we should get rid of all of our use tables, definitely not, but I'm just, well, what I think personally is that we should just simplify our use tables. I don't think we should get rid of them. I think there's a lot of drawbacks to true form-based zoning, like you've mentioned, but that one is losing that control, I think would be a big shift. But I think if we simplify things a little bit, like why do we have special retail markets and retail stores? You know, we have things in our use table that are almost identical, but aren't permitted in some districts and are permitted in other districts. So it doesn't really make sense.
So, but this doesn't propose, I'm still not clear on what is there in either land use restrictions or the form-based zoning you're proposing in terms of the character designations that are going to bring in those types of jobs that will actually reduce the export of jobs and reduce the amount of transits, people leaving the city. So what is there in there that's going to help incentivize that? Because that's one of the underlying assumptions, is that this is going to reduce the amount of export of traffic, but you're assuming that these uses are going to change in a fact that's going to actually result in a net,
so the incentive
jobs in the city.
to attract whatever is the desire of where these, I mean, I'm not going to socialize the capitalistic approach of where a job wants to place themselves, but if there's an attraction because that's where the employees where they recognize there's a location or a focus of where people are coming from. That's any market analysis that any business ever does. They look at where the people are coming and where they're going, and they locate in certain locations in certain regions for certain purposes. What Sally's getting at is that if you create an environment in which that attracts those types of things and the flexibility and the availability of those different types of uses or those types of development patterns, that attracts that business to locate here. One of the biggest problems, and I will tell you, and you all know it, one of the reasons why a lot of people don't want to locate in the city because it's too difficult to go through the process. It's too difficult to locate in the city. So if you create an environment in which it allows it for them to locate and get their building up and running, or their businesses up and running, that's the reason why they'll come here. But traffic congestion and all those other issues are associated with that. So the idea is to create an environment in which they don't have to travel an hour and a half to get to work. They're locating in an area where their employees are coming from because they know this is where their employees are, and they want to live, work, and play there. So that's the idea behind the planning and the implementation of all that stuff.
But if that's that's your main underlying assumption of a lot of this, but do you have the data to show that if you do create this type of development or allow for this type of development, that it's going to draw in these jobs we need?
Nationally, you have that
because
information.
That's one thing I'd like to see is like, if to address that underlying assumption, make sure it comes true, what can we do to adjust the uses? What can we do to bring in those jobs? Because it's kind of a gamble otherwise. We're gambling assuming that it's going to help, but we don't know for sure.
Well, nobody's saying this has to be done overnight.
It could be the opposite if all we get are retail jobs coming in here and people come in to the city instead of, it could result in more traffic in than it does out. I mean, so what do the people in Annapolis need to work? What jobs are we looking for? So you have to, again, I don't know if you're going to be able to solve that problem solely through zoning. Okay, that's why you have economic development, why you have chambers of commerce. But zoning is that area, and if you go through the form base, again, it has a range of uses. So you never can specifically hone in something to a specific use, to a specific location at a specific time. Zoning is not,
that's the evidence, if you will, or the ground law for zoning, the laws, case law, or, the original, Supreme Court justices that said zoning is a police power that the local jurisdictions can use, is because it's a range of uses. It's because you allow for flexible, you're not specifically stating, Village of Euclid versus, whatever it was, I can't even remember, but Euclidean zoning is that you can have separation of uses, but you can't dictate that it can only be this. You have to have that range of uses. So, to answer your question, I can't guarantee, but there's obviously models and there's examples and best practices out there that show that when you create more of a mixed use of opportunities, it reduces the need for people to get into their car and move out. I mean, I use downtown. If you took the population density per square foot and the square foot of commercial that is in the downtown area and the number of vehicles, that would probably be an example of how it works, because otherwise it would be gridlock 24/7 in downtown, right? But I mean, we're not coming up with these ideas and practices that haven't been proven through, any other local jurisdiction that has used these types of practice. Kentlands is another example in Montgomery County, that this is the idea to which you achieve the vitality of the jurisdiction that you are striving to be. So I'm sure we could probably get you statistics on that. Will it work here? I don't know. I mean, there's been a long history, and I could tell you the regional transportation model, when you look at those kinds of things, because we are auto-centric and the model's built based on, trends, if you will, historical traffic patterns, this region is having a hard time, that model's having a hard time making that mode split. So when you start doing these types of land use types and you're putting it into the model, it's not really picking them up like you're saying. And I'm not going to disagree with you, because we are still auto-centric. But there are areas and locations that if you do a micro-analysis, and I use downtown as an example, if you take the square footage and of every type of use, and you look at the road network and the number of trips that are being generated, if you took the typical trip generation rate for a suburban location, it would never work. So it has, these types of ideas and changes to land use is proven through the history of planning. So that's why a lot of what plans try to do is to at least do a hybrid of it. You may not get there, because there is this, there is the suburban feel that people are looking. People do want to live at the end of a cul-de-sac and drive to work and have the freedom of their vehicle. I'm not going to deny that. I'm not putting my head in the sand and saying this is going to be the end-all be-all to solve all the problems in Forest Drive. But everything begins with a step, right? So you got to start somewhere.
Even you're under.
But ask about 3.3.3.
I
thought was to answer Mark's question. You're saying
Rob.
Plan for
What?
Rob's question. Mark's question. Plan for low-scale transit-oriented infill. What does plan for that mean? It seems to me like you're planning to get the kinds of jobs in this area that won't travel out and don't need a lot of cars and things. So I feel like you just argued against what the study is saying.
No, I wasn't. I'm getting to Alderman Savage's point that he's not convinced that some of these strategies will result in those strategies, in those objectives or solutions. So.
Well, even your own model results, they do show a certain level of improvement, but it still shows some of the underlying traffic issues not being resolved. Which brings me to Appendix D, which I'm not entirely. There are some things in there I agree with, but some things I'm concerned with in D. Because it seems to really move towards this. So it moves away from the level of service assessment to the capacity utilization, right? And I'm still not entirely sure I don't fully understand why make that shift, which is one question. But the other questions have to do with the other items in Appendix D in terms of allowing other mitigation. So if a development comes in and they're going to overwhelm a roadway, they can do, and there's a certain traffic roadway mitigation they can do, and according to Appendix D, if that improvement is not going to be found to improve the roadway, they can do other mitigation, be it environmental, economic, and I forget another one that's listed, which I think in some ways is good, but also in another way still doesn't address the underlying issue with our infrastructure, which makes me uncomfortable. Like, well, why should we allow such dense development if it's going to continue to impact our infrastructure? And that's where I brought up the down zoning, because maybe we need to look at some of that.
Yeah.
I'll stop there.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get
But it's
Sally's
based-
$5.
Do I need to answer that, or, I mean, because there's,
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, there are ways in which you can calibrate what their impact is going to be. But that's, and again, I'm not disagreeing with you that it doesn't mean that you give them more density. It means they're going to have to pay for that one way or the other in order to make that work. And that's where the combination of the parts you can't just look at the one strategy and say that's going to be it. And that we give them density, and they pick and choose which one of these things they want to do. They don't just get the density. We want the density because we want all of these amenities. And they're going to have to pay for that in one way or the other. So you get the road improvements and the mode shifts and the environmental. You're looking at it, silo, and to me, you have to look at it a combination.
Well, yes and no, but it says in here in Appendix D that the escrow and the fee in lieu, that you're recommending they have refunds if they're not used within a certain amount of period. And the city doesn't have a good history of using its money or even applying its.
Those are some of the that's why they're in appendix. I'm not saying,
Right.
those are just all the thoughts. That's not necessarily what we're saying it has to be done. Those are
Right.
just everything that everybody thought
This is more of a brain dump. This is
Yeah.
ideas we've had. We would have to spend.
Seriously, it's a
time
listing of everything everybody
developing,
is
yeah.
thought of. So I totally agree with you on that one. So that's why it's in an appendix. It was just a thought.
We just wanted to provide some examples of what an alternative would be, and this was in the 2009 plan to update our traffic impact study guidelines, and we've always gotten stuck on this one issue of how are we going to measure, what are we going to measure, what are the performance measures that we have access to that data. So, we've always run up against those limiting factors, and we haven't really solved those, but there are more jurisdictions now than there were in 2009 who are doing traffic impact study guidelines in a different way, using different metrics to calculate impact and mitigation.
So when you use when you used downtown as an example, I think I'm reading this book, and there's 5 case studies on building equitable cities and leveraging infrastructure and all that. But where Annapolis had this downtown where downtown had an advantage is the Naval Academy was the draw, So you need, in your model, you need a draw, to Rob's point, here's the example in reading from Montgomery County is when they see the city investing in a space, when they see the city's investment, whether it be infrastructure or road improvement, that kind of comes first. And then people, companies and residential property owners, they invest in their properties, and then they attract more residents with moderate incomes to live in the neighborhood. So you've got the business, you've got the moderate income employees who decide to live there, and then they have the spending power to support the restaurants and the specialty retail stores. So that's sort of the model, and the tailwind that you have in this whole model, like, I don't know if that's the right word, is what does what do our constituents want Annapolis to be? I mean, do they want us to be an equitable city, or do they want us to be a bedroom community? And we're on the trajectory of being, if we keep doing what we're doing with the commuters that are leaving the city to work elsewhere, you know, that
So if I, yeah.
just, can you actually get a question out of that?
I think we're going to go round and round on this because you know,
Yeah, go ahead.
There are concerns. I'm trying to address the concerns, and I guess I keep coming back to the thing I keep saying is that if we keep going the way we've been going, you're going to get more of the same.
You're absolutely.
And my
that's
prime
what-
examples,
if you get anything out of
and
this
I know
report.
this is being televised, and Alan Hyatt's going to get mad at me, but I don't care. You have two uses right now, and I forget about the other use, but two uses on that corridor that are moving forward, and what are they geared towards? And I'm looking at these guys only because they know what I'm talking about. You got a gargantuan convenience store, gas station, and a regional daycare that are being proposed. What are those two uses for? They are for people coming, yes, they are for people on their way to someplace else.
Yeah. Yep.
That's what they're geared toward. Why do they want to locate there?
Yeah.
Because they're accommodating people on their way to someplace else. And we keep struggling with what does this corridor want it to be? Do you want it to be a place where you want to live, work, and play, or do you want it to be an expressway out of town?
Right. And that's,
In
if you
and
get
out.
nothing else
I
out
just-
of this
you know, that's
report,
my-
it's like you can't, you have to
That's my
stop.
speech. I'm sticking with it.
No, but it's, I mean, that's our struggle right now as a transportation committee, is that you cannot, you know, reject these solutions. But, and I applaud you for listing them all and who's responsible and the timeline for, you know, I don't see how we, I mean, do you, but anyways, we can, let's continue with, finish the 5 pages real quickly on biking.
for $5.
Let's talk $5.
Sheila had a question.
On the mobility? No, I didn't know if you wanted to continue. Alderwoman, well, Bindle Charles.
Thank you. Couple of things I'm looking at here. Number 3.3.1617 and number 22 on that list, action item, the intermodal transit center. That is something that was discussed about 5 years ago, I think, before Mr. Gutwald and Mr. Gordon were here, but Dr. Nash remembers it. So even though we're talking about the Forest Drive Eastport sector study, was starting to bleed over into West Street, obviously, if we're talking about Old Solomon's Island Road. Is there anything new on the horizon beyond what we discussed about 5 years ago?
Well, the county has taken up the idea of the intermodal facility, and their idea is, if this isn't getting traction in the city, then where can we put it in Parole or at least near the mall, where our citizens can benefit from it, and yeah, city residents can benefit from it too. But they're actually actively studying different locations for an intermodal transit center.
Can you reveal those locations? Or?
The last time I saw, they had about 14. Have you seen it? They had a lot of places all over. Several by the mall. And yes, Harry S. Truman was one of those options. Right, that's right.
Okay.
We were both in a meeting where the kind of the kickoff meeting with the consultant that the county has hired to identify some feasible options. It is also in their priority letter to the state.
Okay. And as I've reiterated many times, the Forest Drive Eastport sector study, Forest Drive extends all the way to Riva Road. Even though we're talking about the county, it still affects us, but of course, there's not much we can do when it comes to the Annapolis Town Center and what they do within that area as well. So we're out there in the western part of our city. We're struggling, of course, with all of that, as you know. So that's just one thing, and which generates, of course, a public safety issue. But the other thing I want to mention too is when we're talking about Forest Drive, as you know, there's a difference between Chickawa Penn going east on Forest Drive versus Fairfax Road going west on Forest Drive. You're talking a corridor versus residential. So Forest Drive has two distinct parts. And that's something I don't know if that we can talk about, discuss, but I know that's something that I have submitted basically to the Greater Parole Community Association to kind of take a look at this study as well, and to find out what their interests are, what their thing is, and that goes into, I know, into the bike and pedestrian issues that we have here. So just to kind of let you know.
I am going to be presenting to them at their next meeting.
Yeah, so we've got a quarterly meeting tonight that starts from 7 to 9, and
right,
but this is more important right here to be for here. But yeah, and so that's also an issue as far as Ward 3, but also from a public safety standpoint as well. So and I've also reached out to the Fairfax Road Community Association, because you've got Fairfax Road off of Forest Drive, and then the back end, which I call the back end, that backs up to Aris T. Allen Boulevard, and then you've got that piece of property, and Mr. Gutwall knows what we're talking about, Godspeedway, and that has other potential issues because it's partly in the county and partly in the city. So that's another issue. So when you're talking about the western end of Forest Drive is in many ways different from the eastern end of Forest Drive, as you know.
Absolutely. Could you say that again one more time? These guys over here.
The eastern end of Forest Drive is totally different than the western end of Forest Drive. I know people kind of breeze through and don't see, but, and it's a public safety issue. And like I said, when you talked about the multimodal, that's going to bleed over into West Street, which is, of course, a state road. And then we've got all kinds of other issues. So we don't look at Forest Drive in a vacuum or the corridor itself, but it does bleed over into West Street and all the other particulars that brings on. So just to kind of bring that to the attention of everyone as well as the public. So thank you.
That's why they call it an artery. Ha 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 ha.
Ha ha ha. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Alderwoman Finlayson.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to reiterate what Pete has said, because this was the conclusion that we came to in rules on Tuesday. We have to make a decision about what Forest Drive is going to be. Is it going to be a thoroughfare for businesses and residents, or is it going to be a quick way to get from the county to Route 50?
Yes.
And, well, if that's what you want, then that's what we should be planning for. I think that our city deserves to have a road, and I hearken back to the day when the eastern side of Forest Drive looked like the western side of Forest Drive. And it was truly a residential road. Had a horse farm on it, but it was a place where people, it was somewhat of a destination. And now it's become, well, we're deciding whether it's going to be a thoroughfare or a destination. But my question specifically deals with Skipper Lane, because one of the recommendations is an extension of that paper road from Aris Allen down, or Bywater, either one, down to Spa Road, which is an impossibility, considering the fact that there are any number of residences that have been developed that are there now. So I guess my question is, why would that be here in this plan when it's an impossibility?
We don't mean from Bywater, we mean from South Cherry.
Okay, because I think it says from Bywater to Spa Road is what it says.
Well, I'm sorry, yes, I probably didn't phrase that right. What we didn't mean, like the relief road, I think is what you're talking about. I think we've given up on that idea, mostly because there's a lot of environmentally sensitive
Yeah,
areas.
I don't,
and
it's
one
not a
road.
thing, we know. We have,
Well, you better share that with the mayor, because he's got partially a plan to put that paper road into reality behind the American Legion.
It's okay.
Okay, well, that idea, that small connection could work.
That's what I meant to do.
So behind the American Legion, over there where the, whatever the
So it would
future
go
of
from
that site
Greenbrier
is.
to
Yes, from Greenbrier.
Spa Road.
Over to Spa. That's a possibility.
Okay.
And that is a small section, but could be a valuable redundancy for our network, especially in the case of an emergency.
Well, the mayor also speaks about, if you know the area in front of the Safeway, there is a sidewalk that's probably 5 feet wide. And he's been talking about extending that wide sidewalk, I guess, down to Spa Road for emergency vehicles. Small, very small emergency vehicles. You know, I walked that distance with the superintendent and the mayor from Safeway all the way down to the middle school. And that's a whole nother impossibility, I think. Well, I wouldn't say impossibility, but a challenge. So,
I don't know that idea, but, you know, he's an out-of-the-box thinker, isn't he?
but the
Yes, he
idea
is.
with the Skipper Lane connection and some of the other connections throughout the plan is just to make connections between communities, to keep that, I mean, to build on the mayor's theme is building connections between communities. And whether it's the sidewalk or whether it's the road, I mean, we definitely recognized in this plan that there are connections where we can make to complete redundancy, provide other avenues, whether it's vehicle or pedestrian. I think we were just identifying connections between communities that should improve the overall operations. Yeah.
well, just
So-
because it's specifically spoke to
listed, yeah.
Skipper Lane. I know the '09 comp plan spoke to connectivity,
Right.
but not, we made sure that that paper road, if I remember correctly, was taken out of the comp plan. And that was before South Cherry Grove came online.
It is shown in the comp plan as a dotted line as a future connection or something along those lines.
So, okay, thank you.
Sally, how often do you talk to the county? How does that work? Do you have weekly to bi-weekly, or there's a lot of county interface here and on,
Right.
do you have
It
a,
depends on the week. I don't
I'm just curious.
necessarily have, I do have a series of formal meetings, like
Oh, right.
the bike commission meeting is every other month, you know, and that has people from their Office of Transportation and DPW and Planning and Zoning, and I go to those. Then there's quarterly meetings. We have a monthly BMC meeting where Anne Arundel sends representatives. So there are a series of formal meetings where I see them at least, you know, probably once a month. Then there's also a series of informal situations where I'm talking to them. I work a lot with Tanya Asman, who's the bike ped coordinator. She's helped us a lot with the bike share, and she's also gotten a lot of bike racks that the city is going to be installing. And so informally, I work with them more often. Also with their long-range planning people, I, you know, am asking for information or advice or seeing what they're doing and vice versa.
do you want to talk a little bit about the bicycle, the bike and pedestrian mobility? The last couple of pages here, right? Are we ready to talk about that? Yeah.
Right, so this is the second part of our mobility section, and a lot of it was about figuring out how we're going to prioritize the recommendations that are already on the table. And we have the bicycle master plan, which is a great plan. It's just we need to do the next step, you know, what comes first, basically, and how, if there's any other low-hanging fruit, that we can do to connect gaps that would make a big difference in the bicycle pedestrian network overall. So a lot of the work that we need to do for that is really just some more planning and some preliminary engineering work. So that's kind of the theme of a lot of these solutions, going down, finding missing links for bicycles, finding missing links for sidewalk connections, working with the county to develop an east-west bike route along the corridor, and keep working with them to develop the complete street guidelines. They're working on updating their street guidelines now, and our Department of Public Works is working with them to coordinate that. And also looking for opportunities where streets were closed off, but that we could make a connection, and that could make a big difference, not necessarily in day-to-day traffic, but just in the situation of an emergency. Like Victor Parkway, that was, that there was, there was 2 streets that almost met, but didn't quite meet, and Dave Gerald paved it so that so bikes can go through all the time, and emergency vehicles can go through it if need be. So other situations like that. So that's kind of the main focus of this area, is just really figuring out what our priorities are and what small improvements could make a big difference in terms of connecting, in terms of making connections.
Alderman Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
His name is Rob.
I'm Rob, that's Mark. Nice to meet you. I like, I see in this section of bike and pedestrian similar to where, well, I guess number 24, and it's similar in the place above, the section above, in number 26 of 3.314, and then I'm talking about the Gemini Road extension specifically, which seems great, and I see it's both a proposed solution for like connecting the Gemini Road extension to Spa, right? And I understand for the vehicular flow, you know what I mean. And then, and that's great to be including the CIP. I love the idea of that, and I see in the vehicular part, it's considered long-term time frame, but in the bike pedestrian part, where it also includes Gemini Road extension as a possible solution or as an action item, it's considered midterm time frame. Of course, I would be a major proponent of making it sooner rather than later. But those are two in the same? What are you talking about?
So you're saying for action item number 27 compared to action item number 24? No,
action item under the mobility, bike and pedestrian, action item number 24. And the above section, the vehicular part, mobility part, action item number 26.
Oh.
I mean, if we can make it midterm, that'd be great.
Right, I might need to clarify that.
That's how this works. It's an example.
Versus long term.
Multiple choice.
All in favor? Aye.
Question.
Alderwoman,
Thank you. Piggybacking on what Alderman Rodriguez said, under 24, is that Lewis Street, which is Lewis Drive and Forest Villa? Is that where you're talking, or that's not?
Lewis by the fire station.
Yeah, Lewis Drive. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Basic questions. From looking at the 2009 comp plan, what lessons learned? You seem like you had to kind of retrace your steps and reiterate some of the same initiatives, and because they obviously weren't implemented. So lessons learned, what were some of the obstacles, and then how do we prevent that in moving forward and getting these implemented in the 2020, or not, I guess the word is, yeah, implemented. Yeah, go ahead.
It was a very ambitious plan, but no comprehensive plan is ever fully implemented.
Right,
That I
okay.
know of. So it's also not, a new plan isn't really the end of the old plan, it's more of an update.
Okay, well,
So
that's good
it's-
to know.
We're just constantly updating our comprehensive plan. That's
Okay.
how the state
Okay. So,
frames it.
okay, so
So some
looking,
things take longer than you think. Some things,
Some things are ongoing, some things just,
Yeah.
you have to reevaluate what it is you're gonna do, like the relief road. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a
You gotta- you
reevaluation of
don't- yeah.
what
So
can
it's
and
a-
cannot happen.
and
So
some
it's a
things lose
fluid-
political support with the next election.
Political?
So it's,
yeah,
there's
so
always,
it's, so it's a
factors
fluid,
like
it's
that.
a fluid document in that sense. So,
right.
but focusing on transportation, but I know, but if this was, forgive me for using the word adopted, but if this was adopted tomorrow, what do you do next? What do you do with it? Do you take this and then don't you have to kind of decipher, get into the weeds a little bit more before it's part of the 2020? Tell me the
Right.
process. I don't think
So
the public
our idea
knows.
is if there's support for this community character idea,
Okay,
we would take that and see what would that look like if we applied it to the whole city. So we would do that really as part of the comp plan. And then is this something we can do for the whole city? Then let's say the comp plan got adopted, then we would be working on zoning legislation to codify
okay.
the community character recommendations and how that would look exactly in legal code language. So what you could and couldn't
you-
do in each different.
So you take all the sector studies as pieces of the pie and then continually cook them in the comp plan and say, okay, this is how it's gelled here, and then this is what we need to, then you go into zoning and
Right,
implementation.
and for smaller plans like West Annapolis, I immediately did some zoning text amendments. So that,
Yeah.
of course, that was 2000.
So, I mean, I would
long time.
answer it at a little higher level. Sally got deeper into it, but yeah, that's how it kind of rolls. But the simplest way to explain it, we go after in any plan, once you adopt the plan, you go after the low-hanging fruit.
Right,
Things that don't cost you any money, they're programmatic, or there's stuff that's done internally. So
Right.
that's what you start the processes with that. In the meantime, on a parallel route, you probably start laying the groundwork for some of the midterm ideas.
Right.
And how that would work and how that would implement.
so that,
Practical standpoint is what Sally was getting into. You start looking at what's still relevant from this plan, the other plans, what we haven't done in the other plans, and bring that forward through the
And what I
comprehensive
learned from
planning
the City Dock
process.
Master Plan, sort of in the other direction, is because that was a plan, and you see these things, and I remember when, like, where's my promenade, right? Remember that? And it's like, well, it was in the plan, yeah, but it was never codified. So, and then with the City Dock Master Plan, you did do sort of the low-hanging fruit, the circulation and well, I wouldn't call, sorry, Lisa Greco, I wouldn't call it the bulkhead replacement low-hanging fruit, but, you did what you could, but it became, things are lost from administration to administration, so, yeah.
So I'd just like to mention that Ross owes Sally $5. I woke him up.
Yeah, well, there were a few skips.
No, we went through it all.
I'll give you $250.
They postponed to hear from all the other committees, so that's why I wanted to make us a letter, like a comment of support for the initiative. Oh, because we're in a, we're looking at this specifically on transportation, but I'd like to invite a motion to just say that we support the initiatives of the, that it's based on the philosophy that we can't continue this trajectory. We don't want to enable more cars on Forest Drive. We don't want to enable more cars, and we need to do something, and you've given us a very comprehensive matrix of solutions, not any one in absolute. So I'm very supportive of using this as a tool to move forward in, I mean, I look at it now and say we've missed some opportunities to actually put some money in the capital improvements budget, perhaps on signalization or something like that. Again, I'm just focused on traffic. So, I mean, I'm struggling with this because I'm in no position to, I don't want to use the word adopt. I want to say that I support these initiatives for mobility, vehicular and transit, and bike. Thank you, bike and pedestrian, and I'd welcome a motion to say what I just said. No, wait. I mean discussion. It's just a vote of support, I guess. I don't. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, nothing. Definitely, I of course support it, and I understand there's still some
committees to look at it, or
and like you said, legislation to be adopted based on the final kind of community character recommendation and support for that. So it's not like. So I guess I don't know what this is a formal motion or not, but it's more towards supporting the initiatives as going forward, and not necessarily at this time adopting it as a resolution to amend the 2009 comp plan, right? Is that what you're?
I'm in agreement. I mean, I think I don't want to use the word adoption.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's like you said, I'm moving forward. We're looking at the initiatives on those with those components, and I think we're moving in a good direction. But we still need input from the other committees as well as community input. So adoption, I think, is not the correct word, but I like the motion that our chairperson has reiterated, and Alderman Rodriguez is also supported, and I'm in support of that as well.
So move.
Okay. Alderwoman.
Yeah, I have a question. I thought we were going to be making recommendations, and I'm talking about all the committees, to help fix what was not tenable in the document. I feel like we're passing the buck on to somebody else. Are there things to, yes, are there things here that you think that are worth keeping and things that should be deleted from the document? It doesn't sound like you guys are interested in doing that.
Well, no. I think it's our interpretation of what the study is, and I can't dispute that there's high traffic on Forest Drive, which is every which way there's intersection, all of that documentation on we've got a problem on Forest Drive. I don't think our job is to go through all these solutions and pick them. I think what I was trying to ask my colleagues was there anything that you strongly disagree with? And I'm hearing not as far as transportation and public, there's nothing we disagree with as far as the language of this report.
Yeah, so like I can speak for myself. I mean, some specifics, obviously, for example, supporting a multimodal and complete streets approach to traffic analysis, which is a major theme of what we're studying. It's either you support that approach or you don't, or you want to go back to the current ways that we've been doing it in terms of levels of service that haven't been necessarily working to the citizens' concern. So I think we geared towards supporting that. I think one of the action items that is critical is formalizing, and it's recommended here in terms of coordinated transportation planning between state, county, and city. That is something definitely that we support and should be formalized instead of a more informal kind of process that has been used. What else? Let's see. The Gemini Road extension, obviously changing that to midterm instead of long-term. Yeah, I mean.
We don't believe it should come back to us. We're
Madam Chair?
No, we're not
Is that
passing
what
the
you're
buck.
expecting, that it's going to come back to you
We-
after someone else acts on it?
Well, if you want us to look at it again, but I
No,
think
I'm
what we're.
asking you that question.
Say it, say
I
it
said I'm asking you that question. Is that what, I thought that's what I heard you saying.
that
That's not.
we're doing our review of this study as it relates to transportation. And we're shying away from the word adopt. That's what we're struggling with. I don't think we can adopt a study that we're only looking at a part of.
This is a study that, if it is approved in any form or fashion, will be the foundation for the next comp plan. Am I correct? So in my mind, and I think this is part of the discussion we had in rules, was that there are some decisions that have to be made about where we're going, so that this does not become another study that sits on the shelf. So either there are things here that we can agree with and begin to use it as a foundation, or we're gonna just say, okay, thank you, and put it away. So my question to your committee is, are there things here that you would like to see as the foundation for the plan, for our comp plan to come?
I think that's what we're saying, not in those exact words. I wish I said it like that. We agree with these initiatives as the foundation for the next comp plan in regard to transportation. Is
So
that
when it
fair
comes
to say?
back to the Rules Committee, which it will, your
Yes.
recommendation,
Yes.
we will assume that what you're saying is you support the transportation and the bike and pedestrian recommendations that are here.
That's absolutely
Okay.
correct.
Thank you.
Do you need us to
Madam
vote
Chair.
on that?
It's recorded.
Thank you.
So-
I'm stumbling on the language to not use the word adopt, but we exactly as you said. What? Alder.
I hear what you're saying. I'm still not totally comfortable because I put it this way, I can't put on a transportation hat, take it off, put on a public safety hat, take it off, put it on a Ward 3 hat and take it off. I've got to look at this comprehensively. I mean, I still want to, before I make the giant leap, I still want to hear from a significant portion of my residents about this. Dr. Nash indicated she has a meeting with the Greater Parole Community Association. That's been scheduled. I don't want to make any decision without, you're talking close to 500 people in the Greater Parole Community Association. I don't want to overstep anything like that until I kind of get some feedback from them. That's me personally. I can only speak for myself.
As it relates to transportation?
As it relates to transportation,
Okay.
because they're going to be talking about several different things.
Okay.
Okay, so, and Dr. Nash and Mr. Gutwald presented at
That's
the
fair.
beginning, at least for us, how many meetings had already been held, but obviously they're still going to have more meetings. But are you saying that you're going to bring back the recommendations from the Ward 3 folks to this committee so that whatever is supported by this committee, you've had blessed by Ward 3?
That is correct. I mean, I
Okay.
feel like it would be unfair of me to not do that. And also, because Fairfax Road is front and center in a lot of this too, I need something back from them. So it's like I said, the eastern part of Forest Drive is totally different than the western part. I've got something a little bit differently than everybody else does. So I have to approach what I'm going to do based on what I hear from the residents. And so that's what I'm saying here. The concept I like is great. And I can tell you one huge part of this transportation part, and Sally knows what I'm going to say, is this bike part. That's really a big portion of what the Greater Parole Community Association is concerned about. Because we've talked about the bikes and we've talked about putting a bike site in Ward 3, and we haven't gotten to that point. And that's going to be, I know one question, that's going to be huge as far as the transportation portion. So there's a lot of moving parts in Ward 3. We abut the county. We've got West Street as a state road. I mean, that's a lot to consider. We can't do anything about what goes around in the Annapolis Town Center. That's beyond our control. We're talking about this multimodal center. A few years ago, they were talking about it on Old Solomons Island Road. It's in here. And so there are so many pieces that Ward 3 has to think about, including transportation and me as the public safety chair, that all kind of tie in. So I've got more elements of this than maybe most, because I got so many other components within this whole thing. So that's what my position is. I'm not going to make the leap of adopting it. I'm going to make the leap in saying the concept is good, but there has to be more input, at least from Ward 3, and our public safety meeting is until next month. So that's another part of it. I know because Alderwoman Henson is on the Public Safety Committee. She's coming in with her Housing and Human Welfare, and that's going to definitely overlap. So there are a lot of other things kind of out there. I'm looking at, like Alderman Rodriguez said, Gemini and Lewis Drive. Lewis Drive is in Ward 3. That's another whole community, the Forest Villa community. So it's a lot out there. Aris T. Allen Boulevard, Godspeed Way. It's a lot. And so that's all of what I'm looking at, and I can't make a decision on adoption or even coming close to that. But the concept and the moving forward is what I can say that I'm in favor of.
Well, of course, you live and breathe it every day. Yeah. So that's where we're at. Oh, go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to add a little bit to what Alderwoman Finlayson said. And yes, this is on the record. I agree with Alderwoman Finlayson. But yeah, no,
Me too.
we did talk a lot about this at the Rules and Government in terms of the approach, and even Pete was saying, well, what do you want us to do? Just scrap the thing or try to use this as a building block, stepping stone for the comp plan?
Right.
And we kind of went with the latter. So that's what we were, but it sounds like, you know, I'm also not, I think a couple of us weren't, and maybe even all of us weren't quite comfortable yet with adoption either. We want to see some things changed, and that's what we were trying to do in the committee, and we're hoping we could do in the committee process, is to kind of refine these action items and and other recommendations for use in the future, be it, I don't know if it's going to be in the form of the sector study or in the next comp plan. I think that still remains to be determined, but whichever case happens, I think it'll still be helpful to have this conversation, because there are a lot of specific things in here in terms of the principal solutions, which I think need a lot of discussion. Like I said, I'm hearing a lot of concerns about the shift to the capacity utilization for traffic assessing, for assessing intersections and things like that. I still need to get some more information about that. The Appendix D as well, I hear what you're saying in terms of those items are just ideas, but the principal solution says, you know, it says specifically adopting the items in Appendix D. So I think that may mean that we should go through Appendix D at some point to kind of get some feedback on those things, or to better understand. I think a lot of the well, there are some good things in there. But it takes, I think, it's going to take more outreach, at least for me, with the community. I think, like what Alderwoman Pindell Charles is saying, to explain something, because it's a lot in there to explain, as we mentioned. But anyway, thank you for all the time.
Question. Dr. Nash, question. You specifically prepared this pink and burgundy and blue sections for this committee. Can you do one for public safety, or is that asking for too much?
Well, it was easy to do for this committee because two of our topics were called mobility. So I was trying to think what I would do for public safety. It won't be exactly the same, but I can certainly pull together different components that relate to public safety in the plan, and I
Okay.
can do something similar, I guess.
That would be really, really helpful.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much. We're, what, April 1st? April 1st.
Oh, okay.
So at the next council meeting, what am I reporting? That we reviewed? We reviewed, what? Oh, no, I want to give a committee report, that's all I'm talking about. We have future outreach to do.
Yeah.
How does that help you, Sheila? What are you waiting for all the committees to come back to you and then?
That was the expectation. There's nothing to report at the next council meeting by anybody, obviously. So, no, I'm not asking a question. I was saying there's probably nothing to report at the next council meeting because there haven't been any recommendations.
Right, I think we have to keep working with the committee meetings and slogging through it, basically, is my thought. I mean,
Did you
So
find
once
this-
you guys
Yeah,
come to some,
was this productive at all?
well,
No.
for me, it was
What'd you say?
good to know that we are on the right track. I
Yeah.
I didn't expect anything. I mean, for this section is one of our, one section we probably have the most consensus on because everyone agrees there's a lot of things about mobility that need to be addressed, and there's only so many ways to do it. So I thought we would have consensus on this, and it sounds like, at least as far as mobility is concerned, we're on the same page, and we'll continue to develop those ideas, provide more information about the ideas going forward, either through this process or the comp plan process.
Okay, that's all we can ask, I guess. And so, is there a work session scheduled for this, city council work session?
I'd
Did
ask
you-
for a special council meeting, or 2 or 3, where we can meet together and we can have public input. I haven't heard back from the mayor promised it when we had the work session on this, because we had the 40-minute flash
Yeah.
for a
I think the
40-hour.
agenda was coming out either this afternoon or tomorrow for the work session.
Well, this would be a special session
I
of
don't
the
think it's
council.
on March. April, we're talking about.
There's 2 items. What are they?
Oh, you didn't pull
ULI
ULI
and
off?
Mold.
We met, yeah.
Okay.
Mold at Hacka Properties. Mold issue at the mold concern at Hacka Properties. I know April 21st we'll be talking about the comp plan, and so I can try to get it on May agenda.
Yeah.
I'd
May-
ask for a special session of the council, not a work session.
Oh,
So that would be something where we can actually deliberate, make motions, so forth, have input from the public, all of those, and have the planning commission here, have all those kinds of things. This is important. I mean, this is really important. I think one of the things, you can see us struggling, but one of the things I don't think you can fault us on is we are trying hard to come to grips with this. And my sense of the meeting, this meeting is, they like a lot of the ideas, but they're not ready to adopt. And I think that's kind of where we all are. But that doesn't help you, in my view. You want to know what it is that you need to do to make us want to adopt this in 2009 and make us want you to use this as the basis for the next comp plan. And look how long it took for this study to come together. Look at the relatively short amount of time we have. We haven't had anything where we can work together like the Planning Commission does, where we can coalesce our ideas and where we could have some pushback about, well, yeah, these are good ideas, but are they practical? Like Sheila did on Skipper Lane, which may well be something that we need to amend or write out of this. But this is going to be hard work, and it's not a 2-hour session kind of a thing.
The other concern, that's why I keep qualifying in the framework of transportation, but my concern is, meanwhile, you know, another committee might be talking about something that impacts transportation, and then, so that's why it's good that we all come together.
Yeah.
That's all, I mean, that's, and specifically, you know, workforce housing and all that. But we, again, we want to support them. That's, I think, what that's the result of this meeting, is that we didn't discourage the initiatives. Okay. All right, well, I'd invite a motion to, I think that's, yeah, that is last on our agenda. So I invite a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Rick was